answer is no, because it's never. But if I said, planning boards issue special permits, there, if I said, then it's a sometimes, because they don't always, right?
I like
Not
those-
every planning board.
I like those questions.
So the question would be asked in a way that you would know, right? So I would say, all, planning boards always have the power to issue special permits. And the answer would be? Is it a yes? Planning boards always have the power to issue special permits.
No,
No.
sometimes.
No, it's a sometimes. Remember I said, sometimes they do. It's on the slide.
Have you looked at the
These are
book?
sometimes,
Have you
depends on
looked
where
at the
you
book
are.
yet?
I like these questions.
Have you looked at the book yet?
Probably have to start.
Yeah. I wonder, like,
Yeah, if I really
have you
focus
looked
on
at the book already?
The notes, the slides, and the textbook, because of you, nobody will have taken good enough notes. Right? I mean, just, there's so much
So-
material,
so
you
not
can't write
reassuring.
that fast. Like,
So
oh,
what do you mean by the text? The book?
The book,
The book, yeah, okay.
What about the article?
the ones that we talked about. So if we talked about an article, I might ask a question. But, you know, depending on the semester, I may get, I sometimes get some more articles than I, you know, like I intended to get to an article today, we're not gonna have time.
But we haven't done any.
So if we did actually talk about a couple of articles, the first two classes we talked about articles. So if I didn't talk about the article, let's be honest, that's just too much material. So if we didn't talk about it, you're fine. If we did talk about it, it could come up. Okay, let's go.
Should I be nervous?
It's not hard.
Yeah. I took that day off. Reserved just for you.
Okay, so. Your property's been rezoned. Oh wait, before we get to this, something I forgot to mention when we were talking about rezoning. Very often, one of the sort of the newer things that are happening with rezonings, that are happening in a lot of cities, is something called the use of community benefit agreements. Now, what is a community? So you're applying for a rezoning, and let's assume you're applying for something other than a, you know, a site. You're applying for a bigger rezoning. I'm applying for a rezoning to build a 1,000 unit, 1,000 unit, you know, 12 FAR residential plus a 5 FAR commercial that's going to allow me to put a department store and other things in. So I'm talking about a major project. And let's assume the city as a whole thinks it's a good thing, right? The city council thinks, you know, this is really a good project on this site. But maybe the neighbors are not happy with it. Why? Well, because it's bringing in a lot of traffic. Maybe it's a lot of noise. Maybe there's a lot of other things. So neighbors have power through their power to elect the city council. That's how people have power. But starting when the first example was the Staples Center in LA, when the Staples Center was built, which is a stadium and a giant commercial development, the neighbors got together and said to the developer and to the city, we are going to oppose this. Now, the neighbors, even a group of neighbors, even 1,000 neighbors, even 50,000 neighbors, wouldn't have any power with respect to a quasi-judicial, right, I said the mere numbers, but because a rezoning is a legislative action, it means it's done by a political body, the legislature is elected. So everybody in the neighborhood hates it. City council's unlikely to vote for it. As a practical matter, if they know that everybody hates it, they know they're not gonna vote for it because they're not gonna get reelected. But maybe it's really a good thing for the city as a whole, right? Remember, just because something might be bad on the corner of 42nd Street and 6th Avenue, it could be a wonderful thing for the city as a whole, right? And the city council is looking at the city as a whole. So you sometimes have this problem. A community benefit agreement is an agreement that's entered into between the developer and some members of the public, you know, a community group, right? The government is not involved in a community benefits agreement, in which the developer says, so let's take the Staples Center situation. The developer said, so the neighbors were very concerned about everybody parking on the residential street, so the developer said, I am going to make sure I have a big enough parking lot. I am going to work with the city to provide for residential parking permits for people who live in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was a lower income neighborhood. The developer promised jobs to the members, to the neighborhood. So a community benefits agreement is an agreement whereby a developer will agree to certain additional benefits for the members of the community. Now, if it's a land use related impact, then it can be considered by, you know, might be considered in the approval process. But let's take jobs. The city can't really say, you're gonna give jobs to the people in this neighborhood. Why would the city care? City wants, they're gonna bring in 100,000 jobs. Let's assume, it's not that many, 10,000 jobs. The city doesn't care whether the city wants 10,000 jobs. It's not the city that wants 10,000 jobs in this neighborhood. The city wants 10,000 jobs. The neighborhood wants jobs in this neighborhood. So it's an agreement, and what happens? The community groups reach the agreement with the developer, and as a result, the community groups do not oppose it. Now, this is not corruption in the as a kind of, because the community groups don't have power, right? All they have is the power of the vote. And that's not, they're not being paid, right? It's not like, you're not, in a community benefits agreement, you're not saying, I'm gonna pay every person who lives in a 5-block area $100. That might be illegal.
But it helps sway the city.
It helps sway the community therefore, as a political animal, reacts to
the approving body feels better about approving.
Exactly. That's what it's about. Now, there's some legal issues as to whether they're even enforceable, because in order to have a valid contract, both people have to be giving up something. You can't sell your vote, that's illegal. So the public can't be saying, I'm not gonna vote for something, because that's illegal. So what is the public given up to sign onto this agreement? But it's never been challenged. Why hasn't it been challenged? Because developers know, I'm gonna enter into this agreement and this is gonna get me over the finish line. There's nothing blatantly illegal about them. There's just a theoretical legal issue, which don't worry about. But so, a community benefits agreement. They're used. A major community benefits agreement was entered into by Columbia when it did the Manhattanville rezoning. The community benefits agreement, among other things, the one for Columbia included money for a tenant legal aid for people who lived in the neighborhood who might be evicted. It included job preference to people who lived in the neighborhood. It included additional housing. Now, some of the housing that it was providing off-site, they couldn't require, it wasn't on-site, but Columbia agreed to do additional off-site benefits. So, Yankee Stadium there was a community benefits agreement with Yankee Stadium, and essentially what it said is it agreed to give for a certain number of years some free Yankee tickets to people who lived in the neighborhood. It was a pretty lousy community benefit agreement from the perspective of the neighborhood. Whether community benefits agreements sort of really work for the neighborhood or not are gonna depend on who's doing the negotiating, you know, whether it's an organized community group, whether it's not. But you should keep that in mind, because if you ever do any kind of rezoning, it's very often these days going to come into play. Now, some states, Detroit tried to make it a requirement. They had to enter into a community benefit agreement. The state of Michigan, Democrat, Republican, overruled that and said, no, you can't do that. So there's some issues about it, but you really just, you know, keep that in mind, because it is very likely to come up. If you're doing a rezoning. Okay, and it only relevant for a rezoning, because remember, it's only where the or a rezoning or a text change, if the text change is of some specific area. right? If it's a general text change, like the mechanical void text change, you're not gonna get it. Okay, so. New York City adopts a rezoning. Any city adopts a rezoning. And you have a building, let's go back to, was a manufacturing district and now it's been rezoned to residential. And let's assume I have a manufacturing use on that property. What happens? Or my building, I built my building under a zoning and now the zoning sets a height limit. My building is 5 stories and now there's a height limit of 3 stories. What happens?
Grandfather.
Right, but that's right, but what does that mean? And that's what we're gonna talk about now. New York Times did a study found that 40% of New York City buildings could not be built under current zoning. This was about 2 or 3 years ago we did this.
What percentage?
40%, a huge number. Oh, I didn't take attendance yet. Let me interrupt. Umberto. Alex, there. Raphael is there, yeah. Julius, you're here. Jennifer. Mary's not here. Oh. Kyle is here. Karen. Joshua. Charles. Philip is here. Brandon. Emerald. Robert. David. Joseph. Christopher. Avi is here. Zachary.
Yep.
Jesse. It's not anything she said. Other Alex. Sorry, I don't mean to call you other Alex. But you come.
Mom called me.
In alphabetical order, you're the next one, so you're the other. Lynn, here. Jack. And you are here. Okay. Sorry. All right, so. So what happens and why does it happen and what's the rule? Okay, so this says non-conforming use, but it also applies to a non-conforming building, right? My building is bigger than I could build now. All right. So what is a non-conforming use? So you are grandfathered because you have a non-conforming condition. It is a use which is lawfully established before the current zoning ordinance, and you keep it up. So you have a building and whatever you had there was legal when it was built and you're continuing to use it, you can continue to use it. In most cases, forever. It's doing exactly what you were doing with it when it was. Okay. So, but what are sort of, so this is the underlying, so what are the non-conforming, so that's the general rule of what a non-conforming use is. However, cities don't like non-conforming uses. Why not? Remember, the goal of zoning, traditional zoning, was to have uniformity within districts. So you want everybody in your C1 district to have the same uses, the same size buildings, whatever the zoning permits. You don't want something that's not permitted. You don't want, right, you've rezoned this to residential, you don't want a manufacturing use because it's not the same as everybody else. So from a conceptual viewpoint, cities don't like They wanna get rid of non-conforming uses, they wanna get rid of non-conforming conditions. Sort of the theory behind it was, the argument was, that over time, all of these uses would disappear. That was sort of the underlying, the theory was when zoning was first adopted, oh yeah, we have some non-conforming conditions, over time they'll go away. But in fact, they don't go away. Why don't they? Because of the market effect. If I have a two-family house in a district that now only allows single family, the odds are my property is more valuable than if I only had a single family house. If I have a use, I have a manufacturing use in the residential district, if it would be more valuable for me to switch it to residential use, I'm gonna do that. But if it's not more valuable, then I'm gonna keep it as manufacturing. I don't think that was thought of. So you have this sort of competing notion. Theory, make everybody the same. Fact, what happens? All right. But what does a city do, or what does a city do? So cities want to limit non-conforming conditions. So remember, that's the goal. Cities want to eliminate them because of the concept of uniformity. Okay, so let's go back a little. What causes a property to be non-conforming? Non-complying is maybe non-complying, non-conforming, depending on where you are. In New York City talks about if use is not non-conforming uses and non-complying conditions. In most cities, I'd say they use the same term, generally non-complying, but not always. Okay, what causes a property to become non-complying or non-conforming?
Change of zoning laws?
It's change of the zoning. What else?
If you tear it down,
Sorry.
if you like tear it or alter it,
No, but that doesn't cause me, if I'm permitted, I can't change it. If I'm changing it, I can't change it if it's not consistent with the zoning, right? So if I change it, it's gotta be consistent. So that isn't causing it to be non-conforming. I may have altered it before the zoning was changed. So but it's not the fact that I altered it, it's like the zoning changed. So yeah, the change.
Really both.
But what causes, I built the building, it's legal today. Tomorrow, what happens that makes me tomorrow not be a non-conforming? So one is a rezoning.
There's no date in the text.
Same thing, text or rezoning, yes. What else? Does anyone know something other than related to the zoning ordinance?
Their building deteriorates for some reason, right? If you don't have, to get rid of it, like, for example, maybe an elevator.
But that's not usually building, that might be a building code issue. And then the building code's gonna tell me what I have to do, so it's not usually that. So, the most common is obviously zoning's adopted or zoning's amended. But a couple of other situations that may cause you to become non-conforming is you're annexed, right? Day one, I'm in the county, I'm not in the city. Now, and in the county, I'm allowed to have, maybe there's no zoning. Now I'm annexed into a city, all of a sudden I'm subject to zoning. Another one that, again, helps with, is a bulk issue, it doesn't live, is my property, portion of my property is condemned. Let's assume we're here, let's go back to this scenario, and let's just assume, so this is where my property is, and let's assume, I'm gonna go back to this diagram, and let's assume I built something over here that complies with the zoning. Now, the city has decided to widen the street. All right, so the city condemned and acquired that piece of property. I'm no longer complying, because let's say I had a 30-foot yard before, which was what the zoning required, now I have a 10-foot yard. I didn't do anything. Condemnation. Generally, it's because of a rezoning or zoning in the first place, but there could be other reasons that your building has come to be non-conforming. Okay. Now, non-conforming conditions exist, the use has to be there, the building has to be built. We'll talk about vested in a minute, vested rights in a minute shortly, but you have to be there. I wanna put something on my property, I don't have a grandfather's use, right? I have to be there. My use has to be there, my building has to be there. Okay. zoning ordinance has restrictions on what you can do with your non-conforming use. If you don't make any changes to it, you can keep your building. The issue is, what happens if you make a change? So the big question is, what does it mean to make a change, and what alterations can I make? What can I do, or what can I not do? And that is going to vary considerably from city to city. So, New York City, if you have a non-conforming use, you can change it to any permitted use as long as you don't create a non-complying condition. So what do I mean by that? I have an existing commercial use. And a commercial use has a 20-foot rear yard requirement. And we're in a commercial district, so residential use is allowed as of right. So my non-conformance is, so right now I'm commercially zoned, and I have a 20-foot rear yard, and I have a commercial use in my building. Right? Tomorrow the city rezones to residential. Now, residential use has a 30-foot rear yard requirement. Can I change to residential? No. Unless I can provide a 30-foot rear yard. Because I'm creating a new non-complying condition. Okay? So New York City is very liberal. You can do anything as long as you don't create a non-compliant condition. Now, I said that already about New York City, but in some districts in New York City allows in certain cases, if you're going from non-residential to residential, gives you some extra allowances. There's some waivers allowed and some the multiple dwelling law and artist residence, and there's a lot of exceptions, but generally, that's the rule. So just because you meet the use, you have to meet the bulk requirements for the new use as well. But I mean, I'll just give with Mamaroneck. In Mamaroneck, you cannot make any changes to a non-conforming condition unless they are required for health and safety reasons. So if I have a two-family house in a one-family district, and I want to add another bedroom, now the zoning doesn't control bedrooms, but I'm altering my house. I can't do that without variance. So that's about as wide a range as you can see. So what you can do in your particular city, is going to depend on the zoning.
So if you convert it to a one-family house, then you can do whatever you want to.
Then I'm permitted.
In Mamaroneck, but otherwise.
Well, you can always comply with zoning. Problem is, in my commercial residential district, I wanted to put in now a complying use, residential. I had a problem because of my rear yard. So I can comply in all ways with the zoning ordinance, and I can always change my use. The issues arise when you can't comply in all ways with the zoning ordinance, and you want to alter your building. Okay. But what is a change of use? I'm going to give you a couple of examples. A restaurant was built in the 670s, or there was a restaurant in the 70s. So there's a case that came up probably in the 80s and 90s. And it was a disco, all right? So it had, well actually no, the case came up, I take it back, and we change the scenario. Restaurant existed in the 50s. Had a sit-down, nice sit-down restaurant. And sit-down restaurant that had a dance floor, so you had band and you had a portion of the restaurant was a dance floor. 70s comes around, we have discos, and the owner wants to change it, right, from this kind of nice sit-down restaurant with a dance floor to a disco. Well, both of them, and the disco serves food and drink. And the zoning no longer permits restaurants with music and dancing. No longer permitted. Can I change from my sit-down restaurant to my disco?
No.
No, why not? Still a restaurant, still has music and dancing, that was the permitted use before, can I change? Why not? You're saying no, so you must have a reason why you think why not.
Because it's like a new alteration to something that already existed. and it
Well,
would-
alterations might be permitted, just because it's an alteration doesn't mean you can't do it.
But it's only okay because it was already in place.
Right, well, but it was already in place, so I'm changing it, we're talking now, I have an existing use and I wanna change it. What
How
point-
much are you changing it?
Well, how much am I changing it? I'm not changing the outside, I'm not changing the size, I'm not changing anything except it's going from a restaurant, sit-down restaurant with music, you know, with a band and a little dance floor, to a disco. What were your thoughts?
I don't see, I mean, from like a legal standpoint, that you've changed your property's use in any way. You haven't labeled it differently, right? You haven't changed it from a restaurant to a commercial use or like a retail, you haven't,
So I'm still a restaurant use is what you're saying, therefore I'd be permitted,
correct.
okay.
Well, it depends on the definition, what's in there.
And even if it doesn't depend, that's exactly right, you're both, the answer is it the same, right? That's the question. So, the first scenario, if let's assume this was was the size of the restaurant, my dance floor maybe took this. So the principal use was a restaurant with music. In a disco, my principal use is dancing. And this was an actual case. And the court said it is not the same, because the principal use is no longer restaurant, the principal use is now music and dance.
Disco would have been allowed under the original
The
zone.
discos are not defined, there's no definition of
Well,
disco, it was a restaurant with,
Primary use for dancing.
it was a restaurant and it had music and dance. Restaurants or music and dance were no longer permitted. So, I could keep my restaurant with my music and dance forever. Okay? The question was, could I change it to a disco, which also had food, music, and drinking? It had the same three elements. The question the court said is it a change? And the court said, yes, because the principal use is different. The principle, the way it's operated is different.
Wait, what if they left it as is and just started playing disco music?
Oh, then that would be fine. It wasn't the
Wait,
music per
what would be
se.
the difference?
That's what they should
The
have done.
difference is how it was
No, I
operated.
understand.
Yeah,
More,
I don't
how
know what a
much,
disco
how much,
is.
so before, a disco, right, what did a disco didn't have tables and chairs,
Oh, okay.
right? It didn't have it didn't have tables and chairs, it was like all dance floor, there was a bar, the bar maybe served food, would have maybe served food. And maybe had some tables and you could sit at them and eat or drink like in a bar. If you think about a bar, it was a bar, bars have tables. But, you know, this was mostly about the music, okay? And it wasn't live music anymore, it was a disco would have been, records. So the court there said it wasn't the same. Sometimes it's not so clear whether it is in fact a change. Right, what if you have a strip mall, and you have 5 stores on your strip mall, and each store is 1,000 square feet. So we're big stores. I have 5 1,000 square foot stores on my mall, and I need 100 parking spaces for all 5 stores. I want to demolish my 5 stores in the same physical building and turn it from 5 stores into 1 store. So instead of having 5 1,000 square foot stores, I'm going to have 1 5,000 square foot store. And stores are no longer permitted in this district. Now, I could keep my 5 stores forever. Can I change it to 1 store?
I would say no, because you would ultimately be changing the certificate of occupancy.
But that doesn't mean I can't change it. Okay, the fact that I may or may not have to change a certificate of occupancy doesn't mean I can or can't do it under the building, under the zoning. That's not determinative. It may be determinative. It may be that the zoning in that city says alterations are permitted as long as no change in the certificate of occupancy is permitted. Absolutely, assuming it doesn't say that. Assuming it doesn't say that. Would it be the same?
I'd say yes, 'cause it's still mercantile and it's still the same thing. I mean, business is gonna go out, you got a lease, so they're gonna come and go. So I would think it'd be permitted, because you're actually not restricting the owner from leasing it out to other people, new tenants.
Well, it's got 5 now. We've got 1 tenant instead of
Right, so,
5
but
tenants.
they, you know,
Okay, anybody else have a different
going
thought?
into business.
Well, a different thought may be a couple things. One, is it the same parking requirement? If it's not the same parking requirement, then that would definitely be a change. Even if it is the same parking requirement, then thinking about, the question might be, okay, well, are the impacts in the neighborhood the same? Maybe 5 stores, they open at different times, they close at different times, so they have traffic at different times. Now we have 1 giant store, everybody's coming for the same reasons. So, I don't have an answer to it, but those are the sorts of things that might be considered.
Who's policing this? If I have 5 stores
The court.
and I want to join one, but to
First-
do that I need to change them, but if
So
I
the
just
first,
say
the first thing is you're gonna need some kind of building permit to do construction, to do some change. You're demolishing walls, right? You're demising walls. Right? I could lease it out to the same tenant and they operate 5 stores. That's not the same thing. But in order to make it 1 store, I'm demolishing the demising walls maybe. Maybe I only have 1 entrance, I'm changing the entrance. I mean, I'm really, I'm doing this really, I'm not like trying to be a subterfuge. So what am I gonna do? At a minimum, I wanna change the entrance, I have 1 entrance, so I need a building permit. I go to the building department might say, yeah, that's fine, or the building department might say, no, because it's a non-conforming use, you can't make this change. Then what would I do? I might go to the Board of Appeals, or I might go to court. At the end of the day, a court's gonna make that decision. But that's why a court would, I'm giving you reasons why a court would, at the end of the day, might or might not make that decision. So, right, what is factors? What are the impacts? Is it different? Is it really different? Is it just sort of a change in presentation, or are there any other? Now, physical expansion is always gonna be a change. You can't physically expand without complying with the zoning code. Because remember, if whatever I'm doing complies with the zoning, then I can always do it. The problem is that what I have is not complying, and what I want to do is also not complying. So the question is, can I go from non-complying condition A to non-complying condition B? And that's where the question comes up. So if it's physical, if to get to my 5,000 square foot store, I had to expand my parking lot, or I had to expand the footprint of the store, that is always gonna be. Any kind of enlargement or change in the dimensions are always gonna be a considered a change, for which you have to comply. Now, if I comply, if the zoning allows me to do that, I might be okay. But again, if the use is sometimes a variant, suppose the use is not okay, but but my physical building can be, I might or might not be able to make that change. Non-conforming conditions run with the land, like variances run with the land. So if I have a non-conforming condition and if Burger King is there and they sell it to McDonald's and they sell it to Chipotle, and under the zoning ordinance, they're all defined the same, then we can keep doing that.
So I had a question during the break, and it's similar to the example you just had before, about the residential to commercial and just highlighting the bulk regulations that you have to be mindful of. So in my particular example, we were looking at something that's residential, that was, it was prior commercial, and then it was converted to residential, and now we're thinking about converting it back to commercial.
You probably,
so-
you might, I would say the odds are you're okay, because the restrictions are more likely, like rear yard, are more for, it has to be bigger for residential and smaller for commercial.
Okay.
So that's my guess, but there could be something else, there could be slightly different other requirements that you have to check with.
And that's all just in the zoning?
It's always gonna be in the zoning, assuming it's clear, sometimes they're not so clear, but yeah.
Okay.
Now, I said you're always grandfathered. That isn't always true. the courts have accepted, and I say the courts have accepted means, and it's in some zoning laws. For example, in New York City, adult uses are only permitted in certain districts. And subject to certain, right, you can't put an adult use anywhere you want. Can't be in a residential district, and there are several limitations. Has to be distance from residential districts, a lot of limitations. Courts have, if I have an adult use that was, when I first started my gentleman's club, it was legal. Or I first opened my pornographic bookstore, I was in a district that allowed such uses, probably because if I started 30 years ago, there were no restrictions. 50 years ago, there were no prohibitions, because they weren't regulated the way they are today. And so I started it. Courts have said that in the cases of adult use, and in the cases of signs, not every state like Pennsylvania doesn't allow this at all, but in many other states, including in New York, there is this concept, it's a concept in the sense that it isn't really, of amortization. The theory being that you can terminate non-conforming conditions. The zoning ordinance can mandate the termination of certain non-conforming conditions within a period of time. So for example, if you're an adult use, most cities, I would say the vast majority of them, again, except like Pennsylvania, which doesn't allow it, most cities accept the notion of amortization. So this ordinance could say non-conforming adult uses have to be terminated within 2 years of the date that the district is rezoned to residential use. Signs, when signs are made illegal, zoning ordinance can say all signs that are not permitted by the zoning now must be terminated within 2 years. Now the reason I call it amortization is that's the theory, I'm letting you keep it for a year or two, and then I'm gonna let me be terminated, so that there's some concept of I'm making back some of my investment. There's no real analysis, it's not like a real amortization, sort of just conceptual. You had a question for me?
Yeah, there was a recent amendment, local law 26, that required buildings to retroactively install sprinkler systems or something.
Yeah, building code is not the same. Health and safety is not.
That's not an example of this.
That's not an example of this. That's just pure and safe. Cities can do anything for health and safety reasons. What would otherwise you might think they couldn't do for various reasons, if it's a health and safety related, they have a lot more power. I mean, real health and safety, like sprinkler is real health and safety. Okay?
Yeah. Is there, the name for it is called amortization?
That's what it's called.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't say amortization in the zoning regs.
I'm just, conceptually, if we were to use a word to describe it, it'd be this.
It'd be amortization,
Okay.
right? That's what it's called. It isn't, as I say, the zoning resolution doesn't call it. It will just say within 2 years of the rezoning of this, a rezoning is adopted, what's today? July 1st, 2019, when the rezoning was adopted, the ordinance will say, not later than June 30th, 2021, all adult uses shall terminate in this district. And if you challenged it, the court would apply the principle of amortization, even though it isn't real, like when you think from an economic viewpoint, if it's am I amortizing, right? If you're investing in real property, you make these decisions. It's really just a conceptual name for the principle, but isn't real.
What happens if the business doesn't shut down when it's supposed to? Do the police literally come in and like evict them?
It's illegal.
So it's similar,
Well,
it's
they
like
can't come in and
residential
evict them.
eviction?
They would have to go to court, right?
You get a
You can't,
warrant?
it's not that's not health and safety related. So if I have a building and I'm operating something that is detrimental, really unsafe or unhealthy, the police can come in and shut it down, right, as a dangerous condition. If it's not, then then the police cannot go in and shut it down. The city would have to go to court, the court would have to issue an order, an injunction, at which point the police could go in.
So they could do it to buy time if they wanted to, and continue sales or whatever.
Could they? Sure. Okay. When does a non-conforming use terminate. So I have my non-conforming, I have my non-conforming use. When does it end? Can I stop doing it? So we've talked about amortization, but other than amortization, most ordinances, there are generally sort of two kind of conceptual basis on what termination is determined. One is the concept of so the question is, have I abandoned it or have I discontinued it? Right? They're not the same thing. Abandoned has an intent. Discontinue is stopped. And those are sort of the two theories. So discontinuance. If the zoning ordinance has a specific provision, right? Zoning ordinances might say, if a non-conforming use is stopped for more than 6 months, if in New York City it's a 2-year, they're called, right, this is called a lapse provision. Lapse of time, it specifies the period. If a non-conforming condition is, if the use of a non-conforming building is terminated for more than 6 months, the use shall terminate. Intent is not relevant. I had a fire in my building, and so I couldn't use it. Bless you. So I was stopped for more than 6 months. I've lost my right to continue it. Doesn't matter whether I meant to, whether I wanted to. If there's a lapse provision, in other words, if the zoning ordinance sets a specific time, that's it. Intent is not relevant. The other way is where the court actually talks, not in court, if a zoning ordinance doesn't say a specific provision and it goes to the court, then the court's usually more on a theory of abandonment. Have I abandoned it? There's an intent. So intent is relevant. Or if the term abandonment is used in an ordinance. When a non-conforming use is abandoned, it shall cease to be permitted. Abandonment requires intent, rather than just stopping use, generally.
Can you give me an example of the two, how they apply?
Sure. I have my manufacturing use up there, right? I have my manufacturing use, and now it's a residential district. So I can continue my manufacturing use forever. Okay? If the ordinance is silent, right, doesn't have a lapse provision, then as long as I'm using it for as long as I haven't abandoned, in other words, I have a manufacturing use there, I decide to shut it down for a year because I'm busy building some other, because I'm a car maker. Let's do an automaker, just as kind of a use. I'm an automaker, and so right now I'm fighting with the union, so I shut down my factory because I'm fighting with the union, and I shut it down for a year because I have to shut it down for a year under my labor provision. I shut it down for a year. But I mean to, after my year is up, I have every intention of starting it again. In a year and a half, I could start it again. I didn't abandon it, I just stopped it to deal with my union troubles. If there was a lapse provision in it, then it wouldn't matter why I stopped it. I didn't use it for a year, I can't use it again. All right, clear? The one exception to that sometimes is if the government forces you to close. There was a New York case about in Chumley's. I don't know if anyone knows what Chumley's is. Chumley's is a Prohibition era bar that's in the village, and they had a fire damage, and there was some litigation with the neighbors because the neighbors wanted it to close. They didn't want it to start again. It was a non-conforming use in Greenwich Village. So you had a question.
Well, I was thinking about your comment about the auto factory, but if the auto factory said, like, if they own the property and everything in terms of the zoning allows it to be used as an auto factory.
No, it was rezoned to be residential.
Okay, I hear you.
That was the example there. It was rezoned to be residential.
Okay.
I can keep my auto factory there as long as I keep it. If there's no lapse provision, then I can keep it unless I abandon it, right? I have evidence that I intend to abandon it. And if there is a lapse provision, then if I stop using it for whatever reason, for that period of time,
Where did you see the lapse provision?
it could be in the zoning ordinance.
In the new zoning ordinance.
Oh, well, when I rezoned it, I didn't amend anything else in the zoning, all I did is rezone this from an M1 to an R6.
Okay, so where's the lapse provision?
In the zoning, in general, they're general, every zoning ordinance, not every zoning ordinance has a lapse provision. If it does, it's gonna be in, there's a lot of generally applicable rules in the zoning, just like there's, how do you get a variance? It's written into the zoning ordinance.
Got it.
Maybe what's the procedure for this? How do you get a special permit? What's the procedure?
It's not necessarily specific to it.
It's not gonna be specific to it, it's generally,
If during this year I intended to abandon my factory, I could not come back and use it as a factory.
if you don't have a lapse provision, right, so there's no set time,
Yeah.
and I have an intent to abandon it, then I've abandoned it. Fine. But again, again, there's generally gonna be some period, you didn't use it for a month, courts aren't gonna, I don't see a court as saying, you abandoned it for a month, I mean, there's gotta be some real, period. It's just that it's not a set period. With a lapse provision, you didn't use it for a year, it doesn't matter why you didn't use it, you're done, unless it was the government, maybe, in some cases, courts have said, where the government requires you to shut it down for some reason, not because you've done anything bad, but maybe for some reason they, then you might be able to start again. Okay. Okay. Now, suppose, so I remember I said to have a non-conforming condition, it has to be there, right? If I have a non-conforming building, my building has to exist. Suppose I am building a building that is going to have a 200-foot mechanical void in it. That's what I plan to build. City just amended, and it's in one of the districts, and the city just amended the zoning resolution a month ago, less I guess, by which mechanical spaces are limited to a height of 25 feet. So, that would mean that I could not build my building that had a 200-foot space for my mechanical equipment. But suppose my building is 3/4 built. Am I protected? Suppose I haven't built anything, all I've done is file plans with the Department of Buildings. Right? So we're looking at the question now of where you don't yet have the building, where you don't yet have the use established. When, if ever, are you allowed to continue building? Are you allowed to put your use in? You had a,
Oh, I would say when your drawings are approved with the DOB.
okay,
Yeah, I agree with you, Permanent. I wrote about 200 Amsterdam Avenue, and basically, like, they have this whole, like, crazy gerrymandered site plan, and, they got received a building permit, and the building department even, like, later admitted, yeah, this doesn't really make that much sense, but they had already approved it, and so, because the whole system, like, it's a widely known system, because developers understand the system to be the way it is, they don't wanna act in a capricious manner to penalize people for, kind of taking advantage of where there's grayness. Because if it's gray, that's not the developer's fault, that's the lawmaker's fault.
so you think,
Typically, the lawmakers try not to penalize people like that, they try to enforce laws going forward. and make
okay,
them
so you
clearer.
think it's to get a building permit?
Yeah.
Did you have a thought back there?
I was gonna say the same, once you have permit in hand.
The answer is, this is a real, it depends on the city. But just to be clear, in New York City, having a building permit does not give you anything. Okay?
That's something that's just, is it written in plain English?
It's always in the
or-
zoning ordinance.
Oh,
It's always
is.
very clear.
There are cities that won't allow you to build once you've approved plans or you have maybe even started.
Including New York City. You do not vest. So this is a question of what's called vested rights. Okay? Vested rights. Do you have a right to build? To build. Remember, because I'm built already, I'm using my building, I'm grandfathered, I'm home free. This is, I haven't yet established my use. I haven't yet gotten my certificate of occupancy. I'm somewhere in the process, wherever that is. I haven't finished it all. The question is, am I far enough along in the process to be able to continue despite the change in the zoning? In a sense, this is a constitutional doctrine, but so is grandfathering. It's all a constitutional doctrine. So if you have a non-conforming condition, for the constitutional condition is, if you prevent me from being able to continue my use, you've deprived me of my property rights, my right to continue to use my property. It's at what point in time does that right, does your constitutional right to build essentially vest? So we'll answer that in a question, but before I get there, we'll just say, so how do you know what your rights are, right? Where is it determined? So, so you asked about if the zoning will say, not every zoning code actually says. Sometimes you have to go to court to figure it out. But I'd say the majority of ordinances do provide for a provision. Maybe not the majority, actually, take it back. Many do, but many don't. So you have to either go to court or look at court decisions. So the zoning ordinance can say it, you can, and so if the zoning ordinance doesn't say, or even if the owner, you can also go to court, what's called common law vested rights or judicially created vested rights. The courts are taking that question of, at what point do my constitutional rights attach? What point do I have constitutional rights to continue building? And the courts determine it. And then there's an exception for something called equitable estoppel, which I'll discuss, but just as, okay. So the question that I asked was, when do you vest? Any of these times, depending on where you are. Texas, you get a building permit, any building permit, and you're vested. New York City, that foundation has to be complete. So, with respect to that void issue, if you are right, Extel was the big one, right? Extel's foundation was complete for that building, this building on 66th Street with the 200-foot high mechanical space. Since its foundations were complete, it is entitled to build with its 200-foot high mechanical space. Do you have a question?
The 200 Amsterdam was also, the foundation was already built, it was already 40 stories.
Okay, but with respect to both vested rights and grandfathering, a precondition is that you were legal in the first place. I have a building, and I'm, this is an example. Somebody came to the Board of Appeals in Mamaroneck, and they had a 5-family house in a 1-family district, and they wanted to do some alterations. And as I said in Mamaroneck, if it's not health and safety related, you need a variance. And during the process, it was determined that they only legally had a 3-family house. That 2 of the units had been created illegally at some point. I mean, I don't mean been illegally created in the last 5 years, in the 60s, maybe, or the 50s, because the zoning ordinance in Mamaroneck was adopted in the 20s, and the building was built in the 20s, and it was the last, and there was no permits. There were no variances or anything granted for them to expand from a 3-family house. So they could not even keep their 5-family house. They had to go back to a 3-family house. It has to be legally established. So with respect to the issue with 200 Amsterdam was, if the permit wasn't validly issued in the first place, then the fact that they finished their foundations gives them nothing. And the example of this is the building that was built in Park Avenue in the nineties, in the early 2000s or the 1990s, I can't remember. Developer got a building permit to build a big building. Residential building on the Upper East Side. Wasn't Park, it was Lex, I guess. And I'm just gonna use this little square because this is here. The building, the zoning resolution, if you remember, I talked about the fact that if you're a split lot, right, if you're at two zoning districts apply, the portion in this district has to comply with the regulations for that, and the portion in the other district have to comply. So this property, make this bigger. So let's assume this is the block. Right? And the question was, where was the zoning district lot? So they got a permit to build, let's say, over here. That's where they were building. And they started building, they got a permit, and they started building. Their entire superstructure was done. The building was, I don't remember if it was fully enclosed, but the superstructure was complete. It was there, and the neighbors said, wait a minute. That building is too big. They can't build that building here, it's too big. And so the neighbors challenged it, went to the buildings department and said, that permit is wrong. And in fact, the permit was wrong. The permit had, they were building it as if the zoning, and the zoning district line was, let's say, 150 feet. But in fact, the zoning district line was only 100 feet. Zoning district line was only 100 feet. And it was a much lower density district beyond. That building permit was not validly issued. It went to the BSA, it went to the court, it went all the way up to the Court of Appeals, and they tried to appeal it to the US Supreme Court, but they were denied the right to, basically because they didn't have a valid building permit. The building permit had been erroneously issued, therefore, they were too big, and they had to take down 6 stories. Okay, so, has to be valid. Did you have a question first and then?
I was gonna say, do you think that they knew?
No, they didn't know, it was a mistake. It was pure and simple a mistake.
That
There
the
was,
developer now?
there's never been a claim that the developer knew. It was a mistake.
And they had to pay for it.
The architect screwed up, and the building department screwed up. They misread where the line was in the zoning resolution. Do you have
Yeah,
a?
my question was, could they sue the building department then, so that?
No.
So the article I did was similar, it was built on the Upper East Side, that the city or the neighborhood challenge that they're saying.
The one on 88th Street, is that what the one is?
No, it's on 63rd.
Okay.
And the Upper East Side community got a third party opinion, and it said that the zoning diagrams varied from the architectural drawings, that the drawings.
Oh, I did, that was recently in the paper,
Yeah,
yes.
that the drawings had more square footage than was allowed. So it's in a, but their topped out superstructure is done, and it's
Doesn't
on
matter.
but the planning department or whoever already approved the zoning application, but yeah, it's stopped right now, so.
Yeah, so you have to be that legal to begin with. Illegality doesn't get you anywhere. People say, oh, I'll just start building them. No. Whether it was intentional or not intentional, you have to be building legally.
Wait, so you said in the scenario where a parcel is in between 2 different zones, it needs to
comply, whatever zone.
Or there's in New York City, there's a way, if it's an FAR, because that's really where the issue is, right? There's a way to average the FAR.
Okay.
So if this was a 10 FAR and this was a 5 FAR, then you would do a percentage. 75% of my lot is at a 10 FAR, so 75% times 10, and 25% of my lot is at the 5 FAR plus 20, and you do the math, and you come out with a number that's probably, like 8.
What about setbacks and uses?
You would have,
They
that's specific to the site.
Yes.
That you can't vary.
Oh, it's the site.
That's specific to the location. So if this had a different setback than this, the
Yeah.
portion here would have to comply with those setbacks, and the portion here would have to comply with the other setbacks.
And is there ever an instance where the uses are so widely different, you have to comply?
Yes, uses here and uses there.
It has to.
Yeah, you can't move uses. You can't move setbacks, but you can move lot coverage, for example. You can do the same in New York City, right? You have a bit of a way, but FAR and some other
But-
things can be averaged.
In a situation like that, you could just get a use variance, right, if it's that big, I
Assuming
guess?
you could get one.
Okay.
So here's another example of New York City, and I gotta move on so we can get finished with this today. Just one more example, because it's really interesting. A developer, not a developer, a homeowner on the Upper East Side wanted to build something in their rear yard, a kind of a stair and a greenhouse, and they went to the building department. And the building department said, yes, you can do it. But there were some issues, they were concerned. So they actually went up the chain of command at the building department and finally got to the commissioner, who said, yes, this is okay. So they'd gone through like 3 levels of review, and everybody had said this was okay. So they built. The neighbors said, that's not right. Okay, you can't do that. And they went, the building department had said it was right, they gave them their building permit. They went to the BSA, and the BSA said, no, it isn't permitted. So then, following the case I just already described, they would have had to tear it down. But in that case, they applied for, so in the first case on 96th Street, they applied for a variance and the court said it was self-created. So they couldn't get a variance. So this one, they applied for variance too. The court said, not the court, the BSA said it wasn't self-created. Why was it not self-created? Because they had gone through all of these processes at the Department of Buildings so that at the end of the day, it was reasonable for them to rely on the Department of Buildings. So it wasn't self-created. And they got to keep it. But anyway, okay, so exactly where you are is going to be determined by where you are. When you vested is depending on where you are, and that's going to be written into generally the zoning ordinance. Okay, so this is New York City. Section 1130, the zoning resolution talks about building permits issued before the effective date of the amendment. And there are 3 different categories: minor development, which is a new building. I know it doesn't sound minor. Major development is more than one building. And in both of those cases, if your foundations are completed, you're vested. However, for other construction, I have a building that's a 2 FAR, and it's been rezoned and upzoned, and I can build a 10 FAR building, so I want to enlarge it to put a 10 FAR building in, and let's assume I don't need to put new foundations in. I'm not vested until I have my TCO.
I'm just confused because you said that for New York City, it was until
Foundations completed.
Yeah. So why do you write building permits now?
I said foundations completed.
Oh, okay. So what's building?
But this is
permit?
that's if you're doing new construction. In New York City, if you're not doing new construction, then you have to have your alteration has to be completed. Unless you're putting foundations in. If there are no new foundations, then the alteration has to be completed. Okay? Right, this is just the section if you want to read it. You don't get a vested rights because you bought a piece of property in reliance on the zoning. Oh, that property is zoned manufacturing, so I'm gonna buy it. You're not vested. And then the city rezones. I didn't do anything but buy the property. I don't. platting like subdivision. If I get my subdivision approval, that might, if it's, I may or may not, be vested.
I mean, I know development projects obviously take, years to plan and whatever, but, new zoning ordinances and changes, and also, it doesn't happen overnight, so if you're staying up to date, you probably have a good idea of.
No, you really don't. I mean, the problem is construction takes longer than you think, so I know there's a law that's pending. I expect to be done with my foundations. Now, in New York City, I said you have to have your foundations complete. New York City has a sort of another little, for the developer's benefit. If you have substantial, so the zoning resolution, July 1st is when the zoning resolution changes, right? I mean, June 30th, let's say it was June 30th. I guess July 1st, it's a Monday. So if my foundations are complete by today, I'm fine. But it also has another, a little extra. If I have substantial construction of my foundations, if excavation is complete and I have substantial construction of my foundations, then I can go to the BSA and get the right to a 6-month extension to complete my foundations. So you have to prove that you have your excavation is complete and that you have substantial construction. Substantial construction is not defined. Obviously, you're not completed because otherwise you'd be vested. You're somewhere less than that, whatever substantial is. Let's assume in New York City, I didn't meet the findings of the zoning resolution that my foundation was complete.
Sorry.
And let's assume I didn't complete my excavation. Let's assume I didn't do that. So, I've started building, because you may be able to, maybe you're doing your construction, you're starting from one street and going all the way through to do your excavation, and as you're doing your excavation, you're also putting in your foundation. So let's assume that's how you were building. So, zoning resolution, the ordinance changed today. Well, I don't have my foundation complete, so I'm not vested. I don't have my excavation complete, so I can't take advantage of the provision that allows me to get an extra 6 months. I can go to court. You go to the BSA and determine that, and get a determination of what's called common law vested rights. Now, I say you go to court, but you start at the BSA. And what does that mean? In order to get vested rights under the common law of the state of New York, and this is sort of more or less similar to what it is in every other state, I have to prove essentially that I've got some physical construction in, and I have spent so much money that I would lose if I'm not allowed to complete construction. Okay? So that is common law vested rights. The court, or the BSA, or the court would determine that even though I haven't met the statutory findings, I can meet the court findings. Okay. What vests? I have a building permit to build a hotel in a district that allows a 10 FAR hotel. After I get my building permit and I vest, so I vested, I've got my foundations complete, I now want to change from a hotel to a residential use, and let's assume residential use is permitted. Can I do that? Well, I can always build what I'm starting out to build, my hotel. New York City, basically the way the building department applies this, and this is the way it is that I can do any use that's now permitted, I can make any changes, as long as I'm not creating a new noncompliance. So, in that case, the one about the residential, the FAR was lower for residential, so you couldn't change it to residential. You had to keep it as a hotel. If it had been the same FAR, I might have been able to keep it. So if I had a 6 FAR for hotel and the residential, and that was rezoned to an R district, it was, what would it have been rezoned to? It was originally a 10 FAR district, and now it was downzoned to be a 6 FAR district, and I had a permit, right, I was vested for a 10 FAR hotel, could I change it to residential use? Maybe yes, maybe no. 10 against, now it's only a 6 FAR, maybe I could because it was always overbuilt by 4 FAR, maybe not. But, so it depends, but you might or might not be able to. Okay, so, so what vests, what changes can I make? You can comply with, you have to comply with what your permit said. But, or whatever permission you granted. If you vest by having gotten subdivision approval, maybe you have to comply with all the limitations imposed on it. Okay, you had a question, you had a comment?
No,
please?
it's okay.
Okay. When you're arguing, the argument is, I had investment-backed expectations when I built, so I should be able to take advantage of what I intended to build. Not so clear. The government always has the right to regulate the health and safety. So if I vested and, I vested for residential use, so let's go to sprinklers, a good one. I vested and now the zoning requires extra, or the building code requires extra sprinklers. And I have a permit and everything for my building, and now there's a change in the building code. And now there's a change that's a health and safety related, right? So that my building doesn't work now because I need an extra staircase, right? So I have all my permits, I'm approved for my building, I have my permit, and now the law changes to require a third staircase for emergency egress. I would have to comply because that's health and safety related. If it was even if it was a zoning or building code. So the government always has the right to adopt health and safety regulations. Impact fees, we haven't talked, impact fees, you don't vest against impact fees. Impact fees are a payment required in connection with development. We don't have them in New York. We have a lot in the South. Most states have impact fees, but you don't vest. The other, somehow I think this
Impact fees do not vest.
What?
So if you pay the impact fee, you do.
I would still have to pay the impact fee. The impact fee is adopted after I get my building,
So,
if I'm building, it may or may not vest. Now, I might vest if the building permit has to be paid at the time of building permit, and I already have my building permit, I might vest. However, if the impact fee is paid at building permit and the vesting allows me to build upon subdivision approval, so I don't have my building permit yet, I wouldn't vest.
It just depends.
Yeah. Okay, what does not vest? Timing and phasing. What is that? I have a building permit, I'm going to build, this was a case in California. California has a late vesting rule, so somebody was doing this big subdivision, 200 units, 200 single-family homes, and they had and in California, you vest upon final plat. Everything was approved for a subdivision. So they were going to build it out over 4 years, 50 units a year. And they had all of their approvals, all of their subdivision approvals. And then the city adopted a law that said, we're not going to give out more than 50 building permits a year. We want to slow growth in our city, right? Too much growth. So the applicant said that the Pardee Construction said, oh, well, we already are vested, so we're entitled to get those 50 permits. And the court said, no. You still get in place for your timing and phasing. You're not entitled to get your permits any faster than anyone else. So while he was vested, it might take him, instead of the 4 years he was anticipating, or the 5 years he was anticipating, it might now take him 10 years. And so you don't vest against timing and phasing. So we have to, okay. So this is what I was saying before. What are the scope of your vested rights? Whatever the permit says. This is, when I forget this, just because I don't have time to discuss it, and I'm not going to get into this. Okay, I want to get to equitable stop. The case that I talked about, the situation on 96th Street. When developer went to court, the developer tried to argue that he was entitled to equitable estoppel. So what is equitable estoppel? In the normal case of vested rights, government makes a mistake, you get a permit erroneously issued, you have no rights. Equitable estoppel is the right, the government is estopped, legal word for stopped. The government is stopped from taking back the permit, from repudiating its permit. So if New York State had had the concept of equitable estoppel, which is what the developer tried to argue, that they should be allowed to, they should apply it, then in that 96-3 case, they probably would have been entitled to equitable estoppel and they would not have had to cut the building, because the argument would have been, I relied, nobody lied to yes, it was a mistake, but the building department erroneously issued a permit. I relied in good faith on this permit, which was validly, yes, it wasn't valid at the end of the day, but it was sort of issued in the normal course, like validly issued. Nobody did anything affirmatively wrong. And so, if New York State accepted the concept of equitable estoppel, and it's a court-created doctrine, then they would have been entitled to continue. All right? Equitable estoppel is not accepted in the majority of states. There's only a few states that do it. Florida being one of the states where equitable estoppel applies. But equitable estoppel does not apply if you were on notice that your application might have been wrong. So if the neighbors in that first case, in the 96-3 case, had told the developer that there was a problem in the very beginning, then the developer might. Okay, so what are the elements? You have to have a government act or omission. The landowner changes their position because of reliance. They were detrimentally injured, and it was good faith reliance, right? There was nobody did anything wrong. They had no reason to assume that it was wrong. All right, this is just a comparison sort of between the two, so you can see the difference, what they are and what they apply. Okay? That is it. We are done. As I said, I will post something.
You said equitable estoppel is a lot of story of it. It's also a lot of
No, it is.
He is trying to claim.
He was trying to claim it. He wanted to make an argument that I should be allowed to use it. Because this is a situation that wasn't my fault.
People should be allowed to claim it if the DOB